A giant ship pleads for help. A human mechanic purges its parasites and turns it into a war machine. The morning fog hung low over the harbor, wrapping everything in a soft, gray blanket. Seagulls cried far above, their echoes bouncing off the tall cranes and warehouses that lined the coast. The smell of salt and old metal filled the air, mingling with the faint smoke of early morning fires from the shipyard. Among the rows of idle vessels, one ship stood out, a giant, rusting cargo ship named Titan's Pride. Its hull was streaked with rust, and layers of barnacles had claimed large portions of the lower deck. Its paint was faded, peeling like old paper, and every part of the ship seemed to groan as the wind moved through the masts and rigging. It had been abandoned for years, left to the mercy of time and tide, and yet even in its neglect it seemed to call out. Marcus arrived on the dock in his old pickup truck. He was a man in his 40s, with weathered hands, a calm but focused gaze, and a mind tuned to engines and metal. The harbor manager had called him the night before, saying the ship had been declared beyond repair by everyone else. But Marcus did not listen to the rumors. When he first saw Titan's Pride, he felt a curious pull, as though the ship itself had reached out to him, pleading for help. He stepped down from his truck, his boots clanging against the metal dock, and stared up at the giant hull. Even covered in rust and decay, the ship seemed alive, breathing slowly in the wind, waiting for someone who could understand it. Marcus took a deep breath, inhaling the mix of salt, rust, and oil. He ran his gloved hand along the hull, feeling the rough texture of the metal. He could almost sense the ship's history in that cold surface, the voyages it had made, the storms it had endured, the weight it had carried across oceans. This was no ordinary vessel. The Titan's Pride had a story to tell, and Marcus intended to listen. He unpacked his toolbox and stepped carefully onto the gangway. Each plank creaked under his weight, sending a small shiver through the air, as if the ship itself were speaking in whispers. The interior was darker than Marcus expected. The sunlight struggled to reach the engine room through the grimy windows. Dust motes floated like tiny stars in the weak beams of light. Marcus switched on his flashlight and examined the room. Pipes were broken or clogged, wires dangled like vines, and the smell of stale oil hung heavily. He knew immediately that the work ahead would not be easy. This was a ship that had been left to suffer, slowly eaten away by corrosion, neglect, and the countless small invasions of barnacles and sea life. It was almost poetic, the way time had left its mark. Marcus began with the engine room, moving carefully among the enormous metal structures. Every bolt and gear was coated in rust, and he had to scrape, clean, and inspect each part meticulously. He had done similar work before, salvaging old machines and vessels, but there was something different about this ship. It was not just about metal and mechanics. It felt as though he was reaching into a living, breathing creature. He whispered to himself, mostly to hear his own voice, "Don't worry, I'll fix you." Somehow, saying it out loud made him feel closer to the task, and he imagined the ship responding with quiet sighs and groans of relief. As he worked, Marcus noticed small details that told him more about the ship's past. A faded sticker on a control panel indicated the ship's last port of call, a small journal left behind by a long-forgotten crew member, and scratch marks on the floor from heavy cargo being dragged. Each of these traces was like a heartbeat, proof that the Titan's Pride had once been alive with activity, bustling with people, life, and purpose. Now it was silent, yet its presence was almost overwhelming. Marcus felt the responsibility settle on his shoulders. He could not let this ship disappear into rust and memory. By midday, Marcus had cleared the worst of the rust in the engine room. Sweat ran down his face, and his muscles ached from hours of hard work. He paused, wiping his brow, and leaned against the wall. The ship seemed to settle around him, almost as if it appreciated his efforts. He took a moment to listen, hearing the faint drip of water in the bilge, the groan of metal as the ship shifted slightly with the wind, and the whisper of the waves against the hull. For a moment he allowed himself to imagine the ship in its prime, sails tight, engines roaring, moving steadily across the ocean with purpose and pride. Marcus spent the afternoon examining the deck. The boards were cracked and warped, but he could still see the outlines of the original structure. He discovered old ropes and chains, some frayed but strong, and a few pulleys that still moved when tested. He smiled, feeling a small victory. Each piece he restored was a small step toward reviving the giant. He could imagine the day when the engines would roar again, when the deck would feel alive under his feet, and when the Titan's pride would leave the harbor with a sense of power and purpose once more. While working, Marcus thought about his own past. He remembered the first ship he had restored years ago, a small fishing boat that everyone had thought was useless. He had poured hours of sweat and care into that vessel, and when it finally sailed again, the joy was indescribable. The same hope filled him now. It was not just about fixing a machine. It was about restoring life, giving purpose back to something that had been forgotten. In the quiet of the shipyard, surrounded by fog and the smell of oil, Marcus felt connected to the generations of people who had sailed this ship before him. As evening approached, the harbor began to empty. The fog grew thicker, and the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the deck. Marcus sat on a metal beam, eating a simple meal he had brought with him, and listened to the wind singing through the masts. It was a lonely scene, but not depressing. There was a sense of promise in the quiet, a sense that tonight, the ship was breathing a little easier because someone cared. He made notes in his journal, sketching diagrams of the damaged systems and listing the parts he would need. Even in its decay, the Titan's pride inspired meticulous planning, as if it were guiding him through its restoration. By nightfall, Marcus had set up a temporary light system and secured the most dangerous sections of the deck. He stood at the bow and looked out over the water. The harbor lights reflected on the fog, shimmering like stars caught in the waves. The ship seemed almost majestic in the dim light, a sleeping giant waiting for a skilled hand to awaken it. Marcus felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. He knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time he could see a vision of success. The ship's groans had softened, almost like a sigh of relief. Before leaving for the night, Marcus spoke aloud one more time. "I won't let you fade away. I'll bring you back." The words felt natural, almost instinctive. In a way, the ship responded. A door creaked softly, and the chains rattled slightly in the wind as if acknowledging the promise. Marcus locked the tools in his truck, double-checked the temporary lights, and walked back across the dock. Behind him, the Titan's pride waited, silent yet alive, a challenge and a friend in need of care. As he drove away, Marcus looked back at the ship through the mist. It was hard to believe that such a massive, seemingly lifeless vessel could hold so much potential. But Marcus knew. He had seen enough. The Titan's pride had survived storms, neglect, and time itself. Now it had found a mechanic who would not give up, who would listen to its creaks and groans, and who would fight to bring it back to life. In the quiet of the foggy harbor, under the fading light of day, a story of revival had begun, a story of metal, sweat, patience, and determination. And Marcus was ready for every moment of it. The first day of work was complete, but the journey was only beginning. Marcus knew that the road ahead would be filled with obstacles, rusted engines, broken pipes, and sleepless nights. But he also knew that Titan's pride had chosen him in its own silent way. It had called for help, and he had answered. And from this moment on, every groan, every creak, every flicker of light from the engine room would be a small step toward a grand revival. A revival that would not just restore a ship, but give life back to something that had been forgotten. The fog thickened over the harbor that night, wrapping the giant ship in a quiet blanket. The waves whispered against the hull, and the seagulls had long since returned to their nests. Yet somewhere in the darkness, the Titan's pride seemed to breathe easier. It had found hope in a human mechanic, a skilled and determined man who would not let it sink into oblivion. And as Marcus drove home, tired but filled with purpose, the story of revival, struggle, and determination began to unfold. One bolt, one pipe, one spark of life at a time. Marcus returned to the harbor the next morning, a fresh determination in his step. The fog had lifted, and the sky was pale blue, promising a day of hard work. As he approached the Titan's pride, the ship seemed to be waiting for him, silent but expectant. The creaks and groans of its metal frame were softer now, almost like a whisper of encouragement. Marcus climbed the gangway, toolbox in hand, and took a long moment to survey the ship from the deck. The tasks ahead were enormous, and he knew he would face countless obstacles, yet he felt ready. He decided to begin where the ship needed it most, the engine room. The heart of the Titan's pride was old, rusted, and clogged with years of neglect. Pipes had corroded, valves were frozen, and barnacles had grown around every accessible corner, some stretching deep into crevices where light could not reach. Marcus set his flashlight on the floor, the beam cutting through the shadows, and rolled up his sleeves. He took a deep breath and started work, moving slowly, carefully, as if the engines themselves could sense his intent. The first challenge came immediately. A main pipe had rusted through at one of its joints, letting in water from the bilge. Marcus tried to tighten the fittings, but they crumbled in his hands. He cursed softly, not in anger, but in frustration at the ship's stubborn decay. He dug out a small grinder and began scraping away layers of rust. Each spark that flew was a small victory, a tiny sign that the ship was responding. Marcus wiped sweat from his brow and muttered to himself, "Hold on, old friend. We'll fix this." It was strange, talking to metal, but it made him feel connected. As the morning passed, Marcus discovered that the decay was worse than he had imagined. Small rodents had made nests in hidden corners, and their chewing had exposed wires and weakened structural supports. The smell of rust, oil, and damp wood was heavy in the air. Each time he removed a panel, the ship seemed to groan and shift, as though expressing relief or discomfort. Marcus realized that purging the parasites would not just mean fixing rust and damage. It would require patience, attention, and almost a sense of empathy for a machine that had endured so much. He moved from the engine room to the lower decks, where barnacles and sea life had claimed large portions of the hull. Marcus had to crawl into tight spaces, scraping and chipping away the growth, using special chemical treatments to remove stubborn layers. Some of the barnacles had been there so long that they had fused with the metal. It took hours to pry them free without damaging the structure beneath. Every successful removal felt like a victory, yet Marcus knew that the true test would come when the engines roared to life again. As he worked, Marcus thought about the crew that had once sailed on this ship. He imagined their footsteps along the deck, their laughter echoing in the corridors, and the cargo they had carefully loaded and unloaded. Now the corridors were empty, and the silence was almost deafening. He paused at one point, listening to the faint drip of water in the bilge and the whistle of wind through broken portholes. He spoke softly, "I'm bringing you back. You won't be alone again." There was no response, only the quiet acknowledgement of creaking metal. Still, Marcus felt a small sense of reassurance. Midday brought the first serious obstacle. A main engine component had seized completely, rusted solid and immovable. Marcus tried everything he knew. He soaked the parts in oil, applied heat, and used a heavy wrench, but it would not budge. He leaned back, exhausted, running a hand through his hair. The ship seemed to groan in response, as if sharing his frustration. He realized that patience would be as important as strength. Over the next hour, he worked slowly, inch by inch, loosening bolts and cleaning rust until finally, with a satisfying click, the component moved. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. The ship's heart had begun to beat again. The afternoon was filled with repetitive, exhausting tasks. Marcus replaced broken wires, patched corroded pipes, and reinforced weakened supports. He discovered hidden problems, small leaks in the hull, damaged hydraulics, and worn-out pulleys. Each discovery was a reminder that the Titan's pride had been abandoned for far too long, but it also gave Marcus an opportunity to make it stronger than before. He worked tirelessly, using every skill he had learned in years of repairing machines, treating each problem as a puzzle to solve. As evening approached, Marcus climbed to the deck to take a break and look out over the water. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, reflecting on the calm surface of the harbor. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine the Titan's pride fully restored, engines roaring, sails steady, moving through the open sea with power and purpose. The vision energized him. He returned to work with renewed determination, continuing to purge the parasites from the ship's interior. By nightfall, the lower decks were partially cleared. Marcus had removed dozens of nests, patched leaks, and restored several critical systems. The smell of metal and oil hung thickly in the air, mixed with the faint scent of sea life he had removed. His hands were raw, his clothes soaked in sweat, but there was a sense of achievement. The ship had survived another day, and Marcus had proven that even the most neglected vessel could be revived with skill and care. He sat in the dim light of the engine room, catching his breath. The groans of the ship were softer now, more like whispers of encouragement than cries for help. Marcus took a moment to run his hands along the smooth, cleaned surfaces, feeling the texture of metal that had been polished and restored. Each spark of the grinder, each tightened bolt, each cleaned pipe was a step toward life, a small victory against decay and neglect. Marcus thought about the journey ahead. Purging the parasites was only the beginning. The ship needed more than cleaning and repairs. It needed upgrades, reinforcements, and careful attention to every system. But for the first time, he felt confident that he could bring the Titan's pride back. The ship was resilient. It had endured storms, neglect, and abandonment, and now, with a skilled mechanic determined to restore it, it had a chance to live again. As he packed up his tools for the night, Marcus spoke softly to the ship. "We did good today, one step at a time, old friend. We'll make you strong again." He knew the road ahead would be long and challenging, filled with sleepless nights and unforeseen problems. But he was ready. He had made a promise, and the Titan's pride had placed its trust in him. The harbor was quiet, the fog returning to hug the water. Marcus locked up his tools and climbed into his truck, glancing back at the giant ship. In the dim light, it looked almost alive, its massive frame waiting patiently for the work that would continue tomorrow. He could hear the faint creak of the hull in the wind, like a sigh of relief. The first phase of revival was complete, and the bond between man and machine had grown stronger. That night, as Marcus lay in bed, he could not stop thinking about the ship. He imagined the work he would do the next day, the rust he would remove, the pipes he would patch, the systems he would test. He felt a quiet excitement, the thrill of solving one problem after another, watching life return to something that had been left to die. And in his mind, he could hear the ship's faint groan, almost like a heartbeat, steadying with every imagined repair. The next morning would bring new challenges, but Marcus felt ready. The Titan's pride had chosen him for this task, and he had chosen to answer. Together they would face rust, decay, and the long years of neglect. But step by step, spark by spark, bolt by bolt, the ship would rise again. Marcus smiled to himself, knowing that even in the hardest hours there was purpose and hope. The fight was just beginning, but already the story of revival had taken root. A story of determination, skill, and the quiet bond between a man and a giant ship that refused to die. The harbor was peaceful that night, the sea reflecting the soft glow of lights from the dock. And somewhere deep within the engine room, the Titan's pride seemed to breathe a little easier, its groans gentler, its presence stronger. Marcus had purged the first wave of parasites, and the ship was ready for more. The real challenge lay ahead, but for now there was satisfaction. One day this giant, neglected vessel would roar again across the ocean. And Marcus would be there, ensuring that every bolt, every pipe, and every engine would be ready to face the world. The morning sun broke over the harbor, spilling golden light across the docks and reflecting off the water. Marcus arrived early, energized and ready. The previous days had been grueling, filled with scraping rust, unclogging pipes, and removing barnacles, but now he could see real progress. The Titan's pride no longer looked like a helpless, abandoned hulk. Its hull had been cleaned and patched in key areas, the engine room hummed quietly with life, and its massive deck was free of the debris that had once cluttered it. But Marcus knew the real challenge had only begun. Fixing what was broken was one thing, making the ship stronger, faster, and more reliable was another. He stepped onto the deck, feeling the smooth metal under his gloves. The wind carried the faint scent of salt and oil, and the ship seemed to stretch and shift, as if it recognized its new purpose. Marcus ran a hand along the railing, imagining the ship moving across the open sea, carrying cargo or withstanding storms without fear. He felt a thrill of excitement. This was no longer just a repair job, it was a transformation. The Titan's pride would not just survive, it would thrive. Marcus started with the engines. The main engines had been cleaned, but now he wanted to improve their efficiency and power. He installed reinforced pistons, upgraded fuel injectors, and replaced worn gears with stronger, custom-made parts. Each adjustment required precision, patience, and careful calculation. One wrong move could damage the engines beyond repair. He tightened bolts, measured tolerances, and listened closely as the machinery settled into place. The engines, once groaning with struggle, began to respond with steady, confident hums. It was the sound of life returning, but stronger than before. Next, Marcus moved to the hydraulics and steering systems. Many of the original components had weakened over the years, making the ship sluggish and unpredictable. Marcus reinforced each section with high-quality metal, lubricated joints, and tested the systems repeatedly. He imagined the ship facing a storm, waves pounding against the hull, and knew that every improvement he made would help it endure what the sea could throw at it. Hours passed, and sweat ran down his face, but he could see the difference. Where the ship had once hesitated to respond, now it obeyed his commands with precision. On the deck, Marcus focused on safety and defense. He reinforced the railings, installed emergency systems, and added strong anchors capable of holding the ship steady in rough conditions. He cleaned and repaired the lifeboats, ensuring that anyone aboard would have the means to survive if disaster struck. He moved carefully, checking every line, every rope, and every pulley. It was painstaking work, but he felt a sense of pride. The ship was no longer vulnerable. Each upgrade made it tougher, faster, and more reliable. Marcus also upgraded the electrical and navigational systems. He installed new wiring, reinforced panels, and added backup circuits to prevent failures. The lights in the corridors no longer flickered, the control panels responded accurately, and the ship seemed almost to anticipate his needs. Marcus could see the potential in the ship, imagining it moving through fog, storms, and treacherous waters without faltering. Every improvement brought him closer to his vision of a resilient, nearly unstoppable vessel. While working, Marcus took breaks to study maps and plan upgrades. He imagined scenarios, heavy storms, high seas, and emergencies at distant ports. The Titan's pride needed to be ready for anything. Marcus reinforced the hull in key stress points, added extra support to the engine room, and strengthened the compartments where cargo would be stored. Each improvement was calculated and precise, designed to give the ship maximum endurance. He worked tirelessly, sometimes forgetting the hours, focused entirely on the transformation of this massive vessel. The transformation wasn't just mechanical. Marcus painted the ship with corrosion-resistant paint, a mix of strong colors that would protect it from the harsh sea and give it a commanding presence. The deck was cleaned and polished, the railings shined, and the hull now looked formidable. Even from a distance, the Titan's pride no longer appeared abandoned or weak. It looked ready for action, a symbol of strength and persistence. Marcus smiled, imagining the look on the faces of those who had doubted its revival. As the afternoon passed, Marcus worked on the propulsion system. He adjusted the propellers, reinforced the rudders, and checked the alignment to maximize speed and maneuverability. Every test showed improvement. The ship responded smoothly, turning with precision and moving steadily through the water. It was no longer slow and vulnerable. It could face rough seas, strong currents, and maintain control where it once would have struggled. The engines roared with a new confidence, and Marcus felt a deep satisfaction. The ship was becoming exactly what he had envisioned. During the work, Marcus also paid attention to smaller details. He repaired storage areas, reinforced doors, and ensured that every crew member could move safely. He installed secure compartments for critical tools and materials and reinforced areas where cargo would be most vulnerable to shifting during heavy storms. He imagined the ship in action, every element working together as a team. With each improvement, the Titan's pride became more than a repaired vessel. It became a machine capable of enduring the harshest challenges the sea could offer. As evening approached, Marcus tested the upgraded systems one by one. The engines responded flawlessly, the hydraulics moved smoothly, and the navigation controls were precise. Even the smallest improvements had made a noticeable difference. The ship seemed alive with potential, every part working in harmony. Marcus leaned against the railing, watching the sun set over the harbor. The sky was a mix of orange, pink, and gold, reflecting on the calm water. He could almost see the ship moving across open oceans, strong, confident, and ready for anything. He spent the night continuing upgrades inside the control room, installing backup systems, emergency alarms, and improved communication devices. He reinforced doors and hatches, ensuring that the ship could withstand storms, rough handling, or even unexpected accidents. Each improvement was methodical, precise, and purposeful. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, but also the thrill of creation. The ship was no longer a relic. It was a formidable machine, capable of withstanding challenges far beyond its original design. By midnight, Marcus stepped onto the deck and looked at the Titan's pride in the moonlight. The ship towered above the water, its hull gleaming with fresh paint, its engines and systems restored and strengthened. The once groaning, struggling vessel now seemed to exude quiet confidence, ready to face the world. Marcus could hear the gentle hiss of hydraulic systems, the hum of engines, and even in the quiet night the ship seemed alive. It had transformed from a forgotten giant into a war-ready machine, not for battle, but for endurance, speed, and strength. Marcus allowed himself a rare moment of rest, sitting on the deck and looking out over the harbor. He thought about how far the ship had come, from a rusted, abandoned vessel to a powerful, capable machine. He had poured every ounce of skill, patience, and care into this transformation. The bond between him and the ship had grown stronger with every hour, every challenge, and every success. He could almost hear the ship thanking him in its quiet creaks and hums. Even in the early hours of the morning, Marcus continued testing the systems. He ran the engines at various speeds, checked the steering under pressure, and observed the responses of every upgraded part. The ship reacted flawlessly, moving with confidence, power, and precision. Marcus smiled. The Titan's pride had been reborn. It had endured neglect, decay, and abandonment, and now it stood ready, stronger than it had ever been. As dawn approached, Marcus walked the deck one last time. The lights reflected off the polished surfaces, the engine room hummed with life, and every system had been tested and reinforced. The ship was ready for any challenge the sea might throw at it. Marcus felt a deep satisfaction, but also a quiet anticipation for what would come next. The Titan's pride was no longer just a ship. It was a symbol of determination, skill, and resilience. By mid-morning, Marcus invited a few trusted shipyard colleagues to inspect the transformation. Their eyes widened at the sight of the Titan's pride. Where they had once seen decay and abandonment, they now saw strength, precision, and readiness. Marcus demonstrated the systems, showing the responsiveness of the engines, the reinforced hull, and the improved safety features. Even the smallest details had been upgraded. The ship moved with confidence in the shallow harbor waters, and everyone present could feel the difference. After the demonstration, Marcus stood at the bow, looking out over the water. The ship had changed, but so had he. Every hour spent working, every obstacle overcome, had reinforced his belief in skill, patience, and the quiet power of determination. He had faced rust, neglect, and decay, and now he had created something formidable, a vessel capable of enduring the toughest challenges. The Titan's pride had been purged of its parasites and transformed into a war-ready machine, strong, reliable, and alive with potential. That evening, Marcus sat quietly on the deck, listening to the soft hum of the engines. The harbor was calm, the sky painted in shades of deep blue and silver. The ship had been reborn, and the story of its revival had reached a new stage. Marcus knew that challenges would come, storms would test them, and the sea would demand respect. But for now, the transformation was complete. The Titan's pride was no longer a relic. It was a powerful, resilient machine, ready for any challenge. The giant ship seemed to settle into the night, its systems running smoothly, every component in harmony. Marcus felt a deep sense of accomplishment. The hours of sweat, careful work, and patience had paid off. The Titan's pride had survived the worst and now stood ready to face the future with strength and confidence. Marcus leaned back against the railing, allowing himself a rare moment of pride. He had taken a broken, abandoned vessel and transformed it into a war-ready machine. And in doing so, he had created something more than a ship. He had created a symbol of perseverance, skill, and determination. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting golden light across the calm harbor. Marcus stood on the deck of the Titan's pride, feeling the cool morning breeze on his face. The ship, once abandoned and rusted, now gleamed under the sunlight. Every inch of it had been repaired, reinforced, and upgraded. Its engines purred quietly, the hydraulics responded smoothly, and the hull was stronger than ever. Marcus took a deep breath, savoring the moment. Today, he would see if all his work had truly succeeded. Today, the Titan's pride would prove itself on the open sea. He climbed into the control room, checking every gauge, lever, and dial. The ship was ready for this trial. Marcus' heart beat faster with anticipation. He could feel the energy in the ship beneath his feet, a subtle vibration that seemed to respond to his presence. He started the engines slowly, feeling them awaken with steady power. The hum of machinery was smooth, confident, and strong. The ship had transformed from a broken hulk into a formidable vessel, ready to face the challenges of the open water. Marcus eased the ship out of the harbor, maneuvering carefully past the docks. The Titan's pride responded perfectly, turning smoothly, maintaining balance, and moving steadily through the shallow waters. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Every repair, every upgrade, every hour of work had been worth it. The ship was no longer a struggling relic. It moved with purpose and strength, as if it knew it had been given a second life. As the ship moved further from the harbor, Marcus began testing its engines at higher speeds. The powerful pistons roared to life, propelling the vessel forward with remarkable force. Waves splashed against the reinforced hull, and the ship held steady, moving confidently through the water. Marcus smiled. The Titan's pride had survived storms, rust, and years of neglect, and now it was proving its strength in a controlled trial. Each adjustment he had made during the transformation was paying off. The ship was responsive, stable, and powerful. The day grew brighter and the harbor disappeared behind him. Marcus navigated toward open waters, testing every system carefully. He pushed the engines to higher speeds, adjusted the rudders for sharp turns, and tested the hydraulics under strain. The ship moved as if it were alive, responding perfectly to every command. Marcus could feel the bond between himself and the vessel growing stronger. It was no longer just a machine, it was a partner. Every groan of the metal, every hum of the engines seemed to echo his own heartbeat. Marcus decided to test the ship's endurance in challenging conditions. Dark clouds gathered in the distance, and the wind began to pick up. He adjusted the sails and reinforced the controls, preparing for rough seas. The waves grew larger, crashing against the hull, but the Titan's pride held steady. Marcus marveled at how far the ship had come. Where it once would have struggled, it now moved with confidence, cutting through the waves with power and stability. Every upgrade, every reinforced section, every repaired system had made a real difference. As the storm grew stronger, Marcus felt a mix of excitement and respect. He had designed the ship to withstand these conditions, but seeing it in action was different. The wind whipped through the deck, rain splashed across his face, and the ship creaked and groaned under the force of the waves. Yet it did not falter. The engines roared, the hull resisted the pressure of the water, and the steering remained precise. Marcus grinned, feeling a surge of pride. He had taken a forgotten, abandoned ship and turned it into a vessel capable of enduring nature itself. The storm raged for hours. Marcus tested every system repeatedly, checking the engines, hydraulics, and navigation controls under extreme conditions. The ship performed flawlessly. It resisted the wind and waves, maintained its course, and responded immediately to Marcus' commands. He felt a deep sense of accomplishment. Every challenge he had faced during the transformation, the rust, the barnacles, the broken machinery, had been worth it. The Titan's pride was no longer just a ship. It was a symbol of resilience, skill, and determination. After the storm passed, Marcus took a moment to rest on the deck. The sky cleared, revealing bright sunlight and calm waters. The ship floated steadily, its hull cutting smoothly through the gentle waves. Marcus looked out over the open sea, feeling a profound sense of satisfaction. He had revived the Titan's pride and transformed it into a vessel capable of facing the toughest challenges. The bond between him and the ship had grown even stronger during the storm. It had survived, and so had his dedication. Marcus then turned his attention to testing the ship's speed and maneuverability. He increased the throttle, feeling the engines respond with smooth, powerful thrust. The Titan's pride accelerated quickly, moving through the water with confidence and precision. He tested sharp turns, zigzag patterns, and emergency stops. Every system performed flawlessly. Marcus felt a thrill of excitement. The ship was more than capable, it was ready for anything. Its transformation was complete, and the proof was undeniable. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, Marcus decided to simulate heavy cargo handling. He moved large containers and equipment around the deck, testing the ship's balance and stability. The reinforced hull and upgraded hydraulics handled the weight effortlessly. The ship responded exactly as he had planned, stable and steady even under uneven loads. Marcus felt a deep sense of pride. Every detail of his work, from engine upgrades to hull reinforcements, had contributed to this success. The Titan's pride was ready for real-world challenges. Later, Marcus focused on safety and emergency systems. He ran tests on alarms, emergency pumps, and backup power systems. Each system functioned perfectly, reinforcing his confidence in the ship's readiness. He imagined scenarios where the ship might face danger or adversity, and in every case, it proved capable of surviving and maintaining control. Marcus felt a sense of responsibility and fulfillment. He had not only restored the ship, but also ensured that it could protect itself and its crew in any situation. As evening approached, Marcus sailed the ship back toward the harbor, gradually reducing speed and checking systems one last time. The sunset reflected on the water, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and purple. The harbor lights twinkled in the distance. Marcus looked at the Titan's Pride, no longer a broken relic but a fully revived, formidable vessel. Its engines purred, the hull gleamed, and every system worked flawlessly. The ship had endured the open sea, a storm, and heavy testing. It had proven its strength. Back at the dock, Marcus secured the ship and stepped onto the deck, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. Colleagues who had watched the ship's transformation over the past weeks gathered to inspect it. Their expressions were a mix of awe and respect. Where they had once seen decay and neglect, they now saw resilience, power, and readiness. Marcus demonstrated the engines, hydraulics, and safety systems one final time. Every component performed flawlessly. The Titan's Pride had survived, and it had emerged stronger than ever. Marcus stood at the bow, looking out over the calm harbor. The journey had been long, difficult, and filled with challenges, but every obstacle had been worth overcoming. He had faced rust, decay, and mechanical failure, and he had transformed a forgotten, abandoned ship into a machine capable of enduring anything the sea could throw at it. The Titan's Pride was no longer just a ship. It was a testament to patience, skill, and determination. He ran his hand along the railing, reflecting on the journey. Every hour of hard work, every moment of frustration, every small victory had contributed to this success. The ship had survived neglect, abandonment, and decay, and now it stood ready, powerful, and alive with potential. Marcus felt a profound sense of fulfillment. He had not only restored a vessel, but also breathed new life into it, giving it strength, resilience, and a purpose beyond what it had ever known. That night, Marcus stayed on the deck, listening to the quiet hum of the engines and the gentle lapping of water against the hull. The harbor was calm, the stars reflected in the water, and the ship seemed to settle into a peaceful rhythm. He felt a deep connection to the vessel, a bond forged through hours of labor, determination, and care. The Titan's Pride had called for help, and he had answered. Together, they had faced the challenges of decay, neglect, and the open sea, and together they had triumphed. As Marcus looked out over the horizon, he realized that the story of the Titan's Pride was more than just a story of repair and transformation. It was a story of resilience, of persistence, and of the quiet power of human skill and determination. The ship had survived against all odds, and now it stood as a symbol of hope, strength, and the ability to overcome even the most difficult challenges. Marcus smiled, knowing that the journey was complete for now. The Titan's Pride was ready for whatever the future held. The giant ship, once abandoned and forgotten, now gleamed in the moonlight, a testament to the hard work, skill, and determination of one man. Marcus had transformed it into a war-ready machine, not for battle, but for endurance, resilience, and capability. The Titan's Pride had survived storms, rust, decay, and neglect, and now it would sail confidently into the future. Marcus knew that his work had created something extraordinary, a living symbol of persistence, ingenuity, and triumph over adversity. As he finally retired for the night, Marcus reflected on the journey. The hours of labor, the sweat, the frustration, and the moments of doubt had all been worth it. The Titan's Pride had survived, stronger than ever, and he had fulfilled a promise he had made to it long ago, to restore it, protect it, and bring it back to life. The ship would sail again, carrying with it the proof that even the most broken, neglected things could rise again with care, determination, and skill.